Right, hello, welcome to the Sisyphus Complex Solution. This is episode 188 and it's called Paper Lion. I presume you do understand the meaning of the title, but just in case anybody doesn't, if you look into Mao and the paper tiger and then just apply that to the British three lions situation instead, then it's pretty much as simple as that. Talking of Mao and communists, after I complete the process phase of this particular episode, stick around until the end because I've got some information relating to the DVLA and my fight with them, which is escalating now. So within this particular episode and for the process stage, I'm going to cover two offices under the MOD, and it's the second one that largely justifies the description of the episode. So if I move into the first part, yep. Right, so the first office I'm going to cover is the Fleet Air Arm Museum. This is another one that is no longer listed under the MOD insofar as the main page of who the MOD say operations underneath them. But when you check the government references for the museum, it takes you through to the National Museum of the Royal Navy, which I covered in episode 178, and I do have to recommend again in terms of that particular museum, as that operation around the Navy and showing the history of the Navy and so far is the one of the rare websites that I've come across that isn't plastered with anybody but English people, so give them their due there. This particular one seems to be based partially in Portsmouth. No, sorry, it is based in Portsmouth. I'm thinking about the next office, but never mind. Right, so this particular museum is based in Portsmouth, so get that straight. But in terms of the numbers for the audit, the accounts for the accounts for this particular organisation are included within the National Museum of the Royal Navy as well. So I don't really need to add the numbers again. But what I can do in terms of their status, which kind of suggests that things should be sort of listed out separately so that people can understand exactly what's going on. In the rare occurrence that somebody would come along like me and try to do an audit, well, they are listed within the charities register, and so we can see their entry here, and we can also see that the National Museum of the Royal Navy is stipulated as the trustee. I don't really think there's a great deal else that I need to say about this particular museum, other than to once again say, God, why do cigarettes go off at such a weird bloody angle when they're burning these days? It's really annoying the way it does that. Anyway, I will recommend going to any of the Royal Navy museums and that, purely because it's a situation where you can turn up and you won't be bombarded with a whole bunch of foreign bullshit, and you'll actually see some white faces. So that's a good thing. Right, so into the issue area, and this one is called the Oil and Pipelines Agency, which from the name alone and that caused me a bit of an issue, and that, but I'll go into that. We can actually go into something where we're starting to see some numbers for the audit. And so dealing with the benchmark period of 2019 to 2020, then I've highlighted that you've got a net contribution during that particular period of 99,000. There's an average salary of 54k and a cost of employment at 34%. Now, some minor variability aside, and also ignoring the losses a little bit really in that for the 2020-2021 period, it is a 5-year period that's seen an increase in staff, an increase in salary, and an increase in the cost of employment. So what we have is, again, something that is a clear expansion of state. And so absolutely no austerity during this entire period under the fake Tories. Now, obviously I did try to look for that single year of accounts that should be available for the period that Labour have been in charge, but I ended up making a bit of an error, and this is where the problem come about with the name. The simple answer is that they haven't published the figures, which is a problem in and of itself. But what I had done was look for the Oil and Pipelines Agency and then found what I thought was the accounts, but which was the Oil and Gas Authority. Two different things, obviously. And the daft thing wasn't that I then sent an FOI out to what I figured was this particular office, the email address that they have for this office, and was sort of asking, well, hang on a minute, why are these accounts so different? And then obviously I've had to withdraw that request directly afterwards because I was looking at the wrong bloody ones. So just in case there's anybody out there that does make the same kind of mistake that I did, just so that you understand, different name, not the same organisation. So like I said, I mean, in my defence, which I have to try to find at least a little bit of something, I've then had to, in withdrawing that request, I've then had to make a subsequent request, which is to say, well, why is the financial report so late? So at least I've got a little bit of an excuse for myself. Naturally, you wouldn't know that I had made this error if I didn't actually tell you. But I do like to be honest about this kind of thing, about any kind of mistakes that I might have made. And considering I did actually write to them, it is something that's worth mentioning in a public forum, because that basically means that you had somebody on the other end receiving an email, having their time wasted, looking at it and going, what the hell is this person talking about? So the one kind of good thing about it was that I think they'd obviously looked at it and gone, I'm not bothering with this idiot. But because I then followed up and admitted my error, what I did get back was a more sort of standard response to say that they have accepted my Freedom of Information request about the late reports, and that they'll try to respond by the end of February. And the interesting part to it, though, and that was that the response didn't come back from the Oil and Pipelines Agency. It came back from the Naval Command. Now, I find that quite interesting because, again, it puts a kind of unaccountability barrier between the public and this agency, which I don't really think should be being put in play here. But nevertheless, the due diligence that I did actually perform on myself probably would have been better performed before I'd actually made the original request in the first place. But you know, it is what it is. Easy mistake to make, but it just sort of teaches me and everybody else who probably wouldn't have made the same mistake that, yeah, pay attention to what the name of things are before you actually start getting concerned about any variations that wouldn't exist otherwise. So who is this Oil and Pipelines Agency? I swear to God, that's my first glass of wine. Anyway, so this OPA was set up in 1986, and it was done by way of a legislative act, which is something I do also find as a bit of a problem, worthy of some wider consideration at the right point, because there's certain other organisations that have been set up in similar ways to that I don't really think this is something that requires legislation. But anyway, if I suppose I was going to go into a sort of a short version that proves that they're wrong, really, in doing this, there's kind of like one of these quick algorithm checks that you can do, and it says that you need to have the legislative powers to define the powers, functions, and responsibilities in order for an organisation like this to be set up. But considering when we look at the further details that are provided in the sort of about us bump, it does also then show that they've had sell-offs from 2015 that didn't require any change to the legislation. So it's not really worth the paper it's written on then, is it? Insofar as this one is concerned. I mean, any agency that's being set up, as far as I'm concerned, should not require legislation to do it. But the fact that they effectively would surely be going against their own legislation if they start selling it off here, there and everywhere, it does kind of make the whole thing a bit questionable, at least. I suppose in many ways it gives a bit of an indication that all this rhetoric around, it's the law, you can't do anything about it because it's the law, it's just that in and of itself, and that is a paper lion. So moving on, what we have is basically an organisation that is actually somewhat critical in terms of its function, because it's supposed to manage what is effectively the fueling of the military. Despite all claims to the contrary, military assets of any value whatsoever all need fuel. They do not run on fairy farts and all that sort of climate-hard nonsense, and so this does have real world consequences, and I'm going to have to come back again to that kind of delusional side of things. But any military of consequence must have air, sea and land defences, and all of which are going to need very large amounts of fuel. And this agency itself only has to cover the depots. Now, if anybody has been with me for any period of time, you'll know that I have done a little bit of a history lesson previously in terms of how important fueling your army, etc., can be, your full military outfit, because we have a certain Shell oil, whereby one of the people in this agency actually worked at Shell, and it was because of Shell oil that they managed to literally fuel the entire Nazi war machine, and that was what made them so successful initially, apart from, of course, the fact that all European nations that were supposedly fighting against them, and that were all mouth and no substance, and so it all collapsed within a matter of days. No real change there. But it is something that people need to understand in terms of if you want to have an effective war machine, you need the fuel. So this is a very critical part to it. If you look at the modern situations and how people with very little ability, frankly, to know anything, whine about oil being a dominant factor within the actions of whether it be like Putin, Trump, the situation in Iran, Venezuela, China and so forth. And then if you pay attention to what the UK is doing, handing over our oil fields to the Norwegians at the same time as pretending to be some great military force, you should actually start to understand once again why the term paper lion would apply. Because everybody else seems to understand the importance of oil, but our lot have just gone full retard. So I just want to have a little bit of a look at this sell-off in 2015, because it does have a lot of relevance. And essentially what we had was under the fake Tory libtard coalition that came into office in 2010. They did their moronic version of a military strategy review and had the bright idea of selling off these kind of critical functions to foreigners. They believed that was a strategy that made sense. What made this worse is that the particular organisation that they decided to, or one of the organisations they decided to sell off to, was Spanish. a country that has one offshore oil producing facility and is very largely dependent on imports. Yeah, more on that in a moment as well. They then also sold off the Defence Support Group, but at least in that instance it was to a British organisation. But I'm not going to bother trying to say this name of the Spanish company because they ended up changing their name anyway, and they're now called Exelum. Ridiculous names. And if we consider the first thing that appears on their website, yeah, we can start to understand that this is indeed about this delusional thinking that the military can run on fairy farts, in at least in terms of the propaganda that they do. Because I'm pretty sure that even amongst the propaganda, this is probably all just complete bullshit, and they just sell oil and gas. Problem being, of course, though, and that is that we're then ending up paying a premium because we're not using our own, and then we have to be dumb enough to include a supply chain that means an additional margin is brought into play because it's not their oil and gas. They're having to have it brought in, so then they're sticking another margin on top of that. It's utterly farcical. Now, I can confirm that they do focus, at least in terms of what they're supplying, it is mainly on the naval fuels. But it does also include some overseas locations, which this alone also kind of dictates that any rhetoric around the climate nonsense is literally just that, nonsense. Now, the legislation in 1986, like I say, it doesn't seem to have been set in stone as to this definition of why legislation needs to exist in order to create these types of organisations, because if then you're going to just ignore that and what defining their powers and their accountability and so forth, it's a bit bloody pointless if all you're going to do is just sell it off to foreign interests and have it completely wrapped up in this climatard ideological delusion that are being pushed on people. Like I say, even if it's rhetoric alone, if that is being pushed into the military by a foreign interest, it dictates that we don't have a serious military. We certainly don't have serious people in the military, and that's going to have a wider impact to the military as a whole, whether that be Navy, Army or Air Force. And we really do need to cut this kind of crap out. It makes no bloody sense whatsoever. Now, the latest information that I can look to insofar as further details around this particular agency, I do have to rely on their later report. So the latest one that I've got was the 2023-24 period. Now, I've had a bit of a look through that to see if there's some kind of situations that I need to be paying attention to. And so within their own specific issues, element of things, this particular segment caught my attention for two reasons. The first, which should be obvious in terms again of the fact that it's a failure of the domestic supply, but then in terms of the statement around capacity. Now, they indicate that there would be full capacity until there's a peaceful resolution in Ukraine. That kind of then leads back to an issue I spoke of quite some time ago when I'd referred to the 1951 election when Churchill came back into office. Because one of the factors that saw a rejection of the Fabian-Attlee at that point, and because, yes, he was a Fabian, of course, so, you know, we have been here before. But it was Attlee's determination to decimate our stockpiles. That did play a big role in the fact that people just didn't want to know. So for them to be making a point of something that, I mean, it should be obvious that if you're going to have a military that is going to be ready to defend your nation, anything short of capacity is retarded. You don't do the Attlee thing where you say, oh, well, it looks like we're not fighting this week, and that's so, yeah, let's just empty the tanks. It's mind-blowingly stupid. Any statement suggesting anything less than capacity, like I said, I don't care what the situation is. The only consideration is efficiency and consistency of supply. And that again comes back to the idiocy of ignoring all of our own domestic resources and letting anybody else have hold of it rather than us. Like I said, and so much of this stuff and that falls back into this utter stupidity of the climate cult. So then another point that I've come across in their documentation is how they stipulate in their performance segment and how they make reference to their SLA with Navy Command. Now, anybody that is uninitiated in this type of language, SLA stands for a service level agreement. And I have to consider in relation to the fact that my FOI about this agency is also being responded to by Navy Command. So they are in service to Navy Command but can't answer for themselves. That doesn't work for me. It just doesn't work. So then, keeping in the theme of issues, dealing with their people, this is an office that reported just 180 staff at the last count, and despite their claim of a diverse portfolio, it doesn't mean die. You know, it's different to die, just to be clear on that, or at least it should be anyway. The whole point of this agency is that it epitomises the notion of this division of labour theory, and how they're supposed to be sort of siloed out according to specialisation. So exactly why they are claiming a diversity of portfolio is a bit bizarre, to say the least. They do then stipulate programme management in particular, in so much as being a bit of a skills shortage that they seem to be suffering from. And again, just for those that are uninitiated, that just means a project manager that can handle multiple projects. So what we're dealing with here we're not talking about technical skills. What we're talking about here and that is somebody that understands process. This is the managerial side of things. This is not hands-on a technical skill set. So even when they're talking about technical, I know damn well that they mean IT systems of some description. And I suppose that in some ways I can give them some grace in the fact that a systems auditor is likely to be the closest you'll get to somebody that's got a reasonably holistic qualifier in an industry that's dominated by qualifications focused on supplier brand. What I mean by all of this sort of stuff is that I know that people get wrapped up in lots of different types of terminology, and it does in some ways make sense to say, well, program management kind of covers a whole array of qualifications, should we say. But in the IT world and that, there's literally thousands of these different bloody qualifications, rather than something that is enabling people to understand that they got the right areas of specialisation dependent on who their actual IT supplier is. So that ends up being a bit of a pigging mess, to be perfectly frank, and something that I really can't stand about the IT sector. But for them to turn around and think that this is a problem in terms of a lack of resource, it's not as if they're the ones that are actually creating the software. And it's not as if they're the ones that are actually going out and filling up, by the looks of things at least, and it's not as if they're the ones that are going out filling up the tanks and then refueling the ships. And we get some evidence of that shortly, but I do think they're kind of overstretching what it is that they think that they're actually doing. I mean, they're overselling themselves is probably the short version of the problem. And this isn't something that I've got a complaint with just with this agency. This is a much wider problem. And it is a big reason, really, why we have people complaining about what is termed of the managerialism, because the managers don't really seem to understand what it is they're supposed to be managing. So it is this situation of, I suppose it's like it's the qualification market. Oh, I'm qualified in this, I'm qualified in that. In the IT market, all you are on that, a lot of these qualifications, it's literally just, I'm an IT reseller for Microsoft or whatever it is. So you can have a certain amount of sympathy with the fact that that is the ridiculous market that's been set up, but you don't have to play ball with it, really, do you? You can turn around and go, no, that's not what we actually do. But that then kind of feeds into the next area of a problem, I suppose, that I've got, which is when they're talking about cyber security and how they're working intensely on cyber security. Why? Why are you working intensely on cyber security? Are you claiming that you now make the software and the hardware as well? So you're developers as well? And manufacturers? I don't think you are. And if you're not, which you're not, your job is to make the suppliers are providing you with secure systems, not you. Again, it's this, have we got a certificate that says that we've got a secure system? Stick your certificate where the sun don't shine. If I'm not the one that's making it, I'm not the one that needs a bloody certificate, am I? Deal with the bloody supply side. Utterly farcical. And then they wonder why so many things get so expensive. Unbelievable. Then we get this. The staff competence. And within this you get 3 acronyms that all deal with the exact same thing. So you've got this COMAH, HSE, CMS. It's all the same thing. It's all health and safety, that's all it is. Why do you have to have 3 acronyms for the same fucking thing? I dare say, when you get issues with these organisations saying, "Oh, we've got a problem with resources," which means that people are joining you in that and then buggering off pretty quickly, and they're probably buggering off because they're bored to death with this irrelevant shit. It's an absolute farce. So let's finish up with this particular part, the performance analysis. Now, again, this is a much wider issue rather than just this agency, because their performance analysis includes their oh so important MUG qualifications people all get to work from home and get an EV to cut down on their travel because climate. For fuck's sake. Priorities are all wrong. You people are the risk. That's why the UK has become a paper lion, because it's full of this kind of absolute bullshit. So I can't be bothered with any more of that. In terms of the overall numbers, just for the benchmark period then, and only including this OPA, because as I said, the museum has already effectively been covered. It does mean that the numbers have dropped a little bit because the 99,000 will be due the net contribution. Now there's a possible, I've still got to clarify a couple of things in that. There's a possible 16 additional offices to cover before I complete the MOD. And already it's obvious that it's going to come down to when I narrow down the figures in terms of the physical Army, Navy, Air Force. Because with the way that the numbers are right now, there's no way. It doesn't add up at all. It's not even going to get close. So, I didn't expect the MOD to realistically add up, but by now that seems to be a standard across all government departments anyway. So in terms of policies, for the Fleet Air Arm Museum, I've placed that one under review, and basically under review column. It says review and reform, but just review in this instance, and that's for two reasons. The first being that it is a standalone charity, and so it should be stated as still being within the MOD. I don't really see why they've removed that from that listing. It may be the case that it is centrally controlled by the National Museum of the Royal Navy, but unless we find a reason to change the classification, it should be reinstated as an entity under the MOD. It says I've got two reasons, and that sounded like one reason to me, but never mind, doesn't matter, I can't be bothered. In terms of the Oil and Pipelines Agency, I actually don't really care that this has been around for 40 years, just the same as they obviously don't care about, under the MOD and that, and their colleges and whatever, and that they don't care about pushing feminist shite in there to shut them down and house a bunch of Afghan rapists. I don't see the point in keeping something that they are selling off to foreign interests and private entities. This is supposed to be, they're supposed to be serving quite a critical part of our military, and that needs to be kept in-house. We were obviously far more competent pre-1986. So we know that it can be done better. And I suppose in order to shut that down, and then whatever deal it is that we've got with the Spanish, tell them to piss off, get our own oil bloody supply. There's the legislation that would be required within that, but does include repealing the likes of this Oil and Pipelines Act of 1985 or 86, whatever it is. despite their own ignorance towards it. I'm sure somebody would turn around and start complaining and going, yo, you've got to keep it because we've got it in legislation. You didn't care when you were selling it, did you? But just to shut them up, repeal the Act. So, moving on to different matters. You may recall that I have stated that I had a bit of a excuse me, I've had a bit of an issue with the DVLA and their demand for £760 road tax. Well, when we have other people out there on the internet and, you know, all the influencers that are very verbal about, oh, I don't consent to anything, and oh, I'm going to push back against this, and blah blah blah, but they don't actually do anything. I actually do get in the fight because I am built that way. So here's a complaint that I sent out today because they made the mistake of coming along and clamping my car when I wasn't watching. Didn't notify me, didn't knock on the door, nothing. I just went to go and have a look at the car and it's got a nice little clamp on it. So I've sent out my complaint to them and I'm including a demand for compensation based on loss of earnings. Because they've got absolutely no right to come along and start clamping my car because I'm in dispute. The timing of my dispute, the letter that I sent to them was perfectly within time. They know exactly what it is that I've been asking, and they should not be doing things like this. They've overstepped the mark, as I knew that they would. So what I've also done with this is, I'm sure that they expect that most people just either comply with their nonsense and pay for somebody to come and take the clamp off and get all panicky and that, and then pay whatever they've been demanded of. Well, no, I don't do that. So whilst I'm sure they then expect that any complaint that you make and that is for them to turn around and say, oh, we've investigated and we find out that we haven't done anything wrong. Yeah, I can preempt all of that nonsense. So what I've also done is I've made sure that the local MP is now involved. I've also been in touch with the Minister for Transport, and I've also got the police involved. And I can add that the specific policeman that I got in contact with, he's been brilliant, and that's been now dealt with. I can say that the MP did get back to me, and I've put a consent form for her to be able to deal with it on my behalf. But the thing about it is these bureaucrats don't get to dictate to me like this. Like I said, I mean, as I've said in my complaint there, they're supposed to be civil servants, not civil dictators. You don't just demand things of me. If they think that I'll just back down and roll over and go, oh yes, I'll do what Daddy Government tells me. No, I won't do that. I will not do that. Now, you can pause and read the complaints a bit more if you want to, if you haven't already. But what I do want to give a basic piece of information about, and that in terms of the original problem that I've got, is that when they have this basis of determining how much you're supposed to pay them because of emissions, well, in the original letter that I'd sent to them, it included information like this. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see it, but suffice to say, I determined a list of cars that are stipulated as being more polluting than mine, which does actually include models the same as mine, but slightly older. And we've got vehicles that are, I mean, including some of them that are considerably more so-called polluting than mine, getting charged £190. So I want them to explain the logic of this. And yes, I will be taking it down the road of McClimatard nonsense, because I will not put up with this. I've got zero interest in any of them making these false claims to me about McClimate. I had informed them at the time that you're wasting your time trying to push any of that bullshit on me, because I've already got the evidence that you're lying. And you don't know jack shit because you never do any due diligence on anything. All you ever do is go, computer said no. Well, you're actually going to have to get your fucking brains in gear for the first times in your life, aren't you? Now, I have also then been warned that, not by the people that I've been in contact with and that, but from another source, that there's a good chance that they'll take my car and crush it. And my answer to that is go ahead, make my day. Because they're going to have to understand I don't back down on this sort of crap. If somebody wants to take my car and crush it, fine. You'll get an invoice for a new car. And then in addition to that, you'll also get the invoice for every single day that I'm without a car. 1,500 quid per day, plus a new car. You want to play games? I'll play. I said, this is the thing, when you get all these people that are, oh, I'm an influencer and I'm going to make statements that I'm not going to actually do anything about. Oh, I think everybody needs to stand up while I'm sitting down. No. I don't do that. If I say that I'm going to push back against something, I'll bloody push back against it. And not only am I pushing back in the official way, I'm also making a mental note of exactly how it is that they respond. Because of it, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Nothing is consequence free. So, that's a situation with the DVLA. I said, I've seen it, and I mean, I've had some backwards and forwards with people just this week and that over this. Oh, well, I think that we should do this and we should do that and we should do the other. And every single time I'm like, you don't actually do anything, do you? It's a lot of that and nothing else. And I really can't abide that sort of nonsense. The amount of people that are yak all the time, and the moment that daddy government comes knocking on the door, they fold like a cheap suit. Oh, just pay it. Oh, don't cause trouble, just pay it. Do as daddy government said. Fuck off. No. That's not how it works. That is not how it bloody works. And they will learn. I'm not somebody that tolerates this sort of shit. Up to them. They're the ones that pick the fight, not me. So, going back to the, just quickly going back to the situation over that oil and gas agency. And just as another piece of clarification, that when I'm turning around and pointing out these problems over this qualification and that qualification and what they all actually mean, it's like, so I know lots of people get really bored with listening to that sort of stuff. There's quite a bit of it that people get bored with and they call managerialism, but which does actually make sense. You have to be involved in it to actually know about it. If you're looking at it from outside, I'm sure it looks absolutely fucking ridiculous. And it's just a matter of understanding from the inside what is ridiculous and what isn't. And so just to clarify for anybody that does wonder, do I actually have any stake in this kind of area? Well, I have had for quite a long time, because I did have the and I have to say had the project management qualifications, both as regular project management, but then also international project management. And the only reason why that becomes did have is because I have mentioned this one a long time in the past before as well. In order to maintain those qualifications, you have to pay them an annual fee, which I will not do. I don't pay to remain qualified. I either got the qualification or I fucking didn't. And I did. I got mine through an organisation that is known as PPM. That's an American-based one. The main one that you have in the UK is called PMI. I did do some studies with the PMI to the extent that they wanted me to complete their particular part for me to gain their qualification, and then they wanted me to join them as a trainer, and I refused because I pointed out to them how so many of their processes were actually bullshit and they were wrong, to which they agreed that they were wrong, but ho-hum, that's what the system says. So you know, going back quite a long way now, I have known that there's a lot of this sort of nonsense that goes on. It's written down, therefore it is. No. And you certainly don't train people like that. I can't stand all this bullshit of, oh well, if you just put that, we know it's the wrong answer, but if you just put that answer in, and then you know it all goes through. No, you're teaching people the wrong thing. Then I will not do that. I wouldn't do it then, and I won't do it now. That's what makes for the problems that you get. The more that time goes by, and the more people that don't understand the actual qualification, the more incompetent they become, because the incompetents are then passing on that incompetency to the next lot, and then everybody wonders why. Suddenly we've got no. Where's all of our skills gone? Well, it's because you've been teaching them bullshit. That's why. So that side of things, and that this whether you want to call it a technical qualification, personally I'll call it a process qualification, or especially in things like engineering or anything remotely based on competence, the entire system needs to be looked at across the board, and especially within these IT systems. I'm qualified in this, that means I can use the Amazon Web Services. Who cares? Is that service competent or not? If it's not, if there's any security issues, well then that would be Amazon's fault, wouldn't it? That'd be Microsoft's fault. That'd be whoever it is that you're using. Google, whatever. They're the ones that should be held to account. Not all this nonsense of, oh well, because we've got an agile process, we're now going to just throw some crap out into the market and we'll fix it as we go along. Oh, that's what updates are for. No, fuck off. If you can't put something together competently to begin with, don't fucking sell it. That's where the real, if you want to have any sort of regular, because everybody else has to be regulated up to the bloody arsehole. But those organisations, it's just, we're just going to throw something out there and we'll deal with it later. No, not acceptable. DVLA, oh, we'll just throw the road tax prices out there and nobody will complain anyway. Well, yeah, people will complain. I'll complain. Your system makes no fucking sense whatsoever. And I ain't having it. I know within industry that this type of approach gets a lot of people very uncomfortable. They don't like it. They don't like it when somebody's pointing out to say, that's wrong. No, you all have to keep your mouth shut and go, okay, dribble. And then just keep going forward and that. And then everybody goes, oh, we've got all these problems that have piled up. Oh, I wonder why. Because nobody's ever got the balls to stand up and go, what the actual fuck do you think you're doing? I'd rather have the argument there and then. I'd rather have the people in the room turn around and say, oh, God, he's at it again. I'd rather that, and we solve the problem, than wait 2 years down the road, and especially when you're dealing with military, and then you go, oh dear, none of our equipment works. Pretty bloody important that it does, isn't it? If more people were as stubborn about these things than I am, shit would actually work. Anyway, that's my sales pitch. Right, that'll do it for this week. Have a good week. I'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.